He ignored me for years. Then I arrived with the badge that changed everything. Clapperboard opening hook. He looked up from his desk, saw the badge on my chest, and for the first time in 7 years, he had absolutely nothing to say. I had rehearsed this moment exactly 0 times. Not because I hadn't thought about it. I had thought about it more than I would ever admit to anyone. I had thought about it on the flight back. I had thought about it in the car from the airport. I had thought about it standing in the lobby of the building where I had once been invisible, waiting for the elevator, watching the floors count down. I had thought about what I would say, what he would say, how I would hold my face when I saw him. And then I had walked through the door, and he had looked up, and I had not needed to say a single word. Because the badge said everything. Senior Director, National Urban Design Institute, Rohan Verma. That was my name now. That was what 7 years looked like. And the man sitting behind the desk. The man who had looked through me for 3 years like I was furniture, like I was background noise, like I was a problem he hadn't gotten around to solving yet, was going to spend the next 6 months working under my supervision. I did not smile. I didn't need to. Part 1, the boy who wasn't seen. Let me take you back, because you need to understand where this started to understand what it became. My name is Rohan Verma, and I grew up in Jaipur, the second son of a schoolteacher father and a mother who ran a small textile business and had the organizational capacity of a military general applied to domestic life. I was not, by any external measure, a remarkable child. Good at school without being exceptional. Quiet in rooms where the loud people got the attention. The kind of person who noticed things, details, patterns, the way a room was arranged, the way a building sat in its landscape, and filed them carefully away without anyone knowing he was doing it. I had come to Mumbai at 22 for a postgraduate program in urban design, which was the first real decision I had made entirely for myself. My father had expected engineering. My brother had done engineering, very successfully, and was now doing exactly what engineers in our family were supposed to do. I had looked at that path and known, with the particular quiet certainty of someone who has been observing carefully for years, that it was not mine. Urban design was mine. The way cities worked, the way spaces made people feel, the way a well-placed tree or a wrong-scaled building could change the entire emotional register of a street. This was the thing I had been paying attention to my whole life, without knowing there was a field for it. Finding the field felt like finding the word for a color you had always been able to see, but never name. The program was in Mumbai. I came to Mumbai. I found a small room in Bandra, shared with 2 other students, and I began building. The institute where I studied was called the National Urban Design Institute, and it still is, the best of its kind in the country. Rigorous, demanding, full of people who cared about the work with the particular intensity that comes when a field is still young enough to feel urgent. I loved it immediately and completely. I worked harder than I had ever worked at anything. I stayed late, came in early, filled sketchbooks at a rate that alarmed my roommates. And that was where I met Karen. Karen Malhotra. I need to stop here and be precise, because Karen is the center of this story, and I want you to understand him completely before I tell you what he did, and what I did, and what we eventually, improbably became. Karen was 26 when I met him, 4 years older than me, a senior student finishing his final year when I arrived. He was the kind of person that institutions produce sometimes, brilliant in the specific way that combines genuine talent with the confidence to take up space, the confidence to let the talent be seen. He presented his work like he had already decided it was good and was simply allowing you to confirm what he knew. He was funny and sharp, and the kind of handsome that you notice and then immediately feel slightly irritated at yourself for noticing. He was also, I learned quickly, the person everyone in the institute measured themselves against, not because he demanded it, just because he was there, doing the work at a level that made the benchmark obvious. I had noticed him on my first day, not in the complicated way, not yet. Just noticed him the way you notice someone who occupies a room differently than everyone else. He had been standing at a drafting table in the studio, leaning over a large plan, and he had looked up when the new students came in, and his eyes had moved across the group and had passed over me. completely, without a pause. I had noted this, filed it, and thought nothing more of it. That was my mistake, or perhaps it was inevitable. I'm not entirely sure there's a difference. The next 3 months established the pattern. We were in several shared studio sessions. The Institute ran it that way, mixed years together in the design studios, on the theory that newer students learned from watching the senior ones work, which was true. I learned an enormous amount from watching Karen work. The way he thought through a problem spatially, the way he used models to test ideas rather than just illustrate them, the way he could hold a complex brief in his head and turn it over and find the angle that made it yield. I also learned that I did not exist in his field of awareness. This is not an exaggeration. I want to be precise about it because I have spent years being precise about it, not to nurse a wound, but to understand it accurately. Karen was not cruel. He did not snub me or dismiss me or say anything unkind. He simply did not register me. If I spoke in a group discussion, his eyes moved to whoever spoke next with no acknowledgement of what I had said. If I was at a drafting table near him, he would reach across my work to get something he needed without a word. Once, at a critique session, I made a point about a project's relationship to pedestrian flow that the faculty member had called particularly insightful, and Karen had nodded at the faculty member, not at me. I was, to Karen Malhotra, background. For 3 years, my entire postgraduate program, this did not change. He graduated, joined a prestigious firm, began building a reputation in the field. I completed my degree, took a position at a smaller practice, worked. We occasionally appeared at the same industry events because the urban design world in India, while growing, is not large. At these events, Karen would speak to everyone around me and through me, and passed me with the practiced ease of a man who had never once considered that I might be worth stopping for. I told myself it didn't bother me. This was not entirely true. The thing that I have never told anyone, and I am telling you now because this is the story, is that somewhere in those 3 years of being invisible to Karen Malhotra, I had fallen in love with him. I know how that sounds. I know what it looks like from the outside. A young man, invisible to someone he admired, constructing a feeling out of distance and frustration and longing, and the particular alchemy of watching someone brilliant work for years. I know there are reasonable arguments that what I felt was not love but projection, not real knowledge, but imagination filling the gap left by the actual person's absence. I have made all these arguments to myself, in great detail, over many years. They didn't change what I felt. It was not simple admiration. I had admired other people without this particular complication. It was the specific quality of my attention when he was in a room. The way I remembered things he had said in public discussions, not because I was taking notes, but because they stayed. The way a piece of his work in a journal or a competition showing would stop me completely, not just because it was good, but because I could see the thinking behind it, and the thinking was extraordinary, and I wanted, more than I had wanted most things, to talk to him about it. Actually talk, as equals, as people who saw the same things. That was what hurt about being invisible, not the ego of being overlooked, the waste, the conversation we were not having. I had not acted on any of this. I was not a fool. I was an invisible young man at an institute, and he was the golden student, and I understood the shape of reality. I had kept it filed away, locked, practical, and I had focused on the work. The work was always there. The work was reliable in a way that feelings emphatically were not. I had gotten very good at the work. Part 2, 7 years. Let me tell you what 7 years look like when you apply yourself completely to a thing you love. I left Mumbai at 25 with my degree and a job offer at a practice in Delhi that worked on public space design, parks, transit corridors, community squares. Small projects, mostly government contracts, the unglamorous end of the field where the budgets were tight and the bureaucracy was real, and most young designers lasted 2 years before moving on to something more immediately rewarding. I lasted 7 years, not because I had no other options, because the work mattered to me in a way I couldn't manufacture elsewhere. Public space design is the most honest form of urban design because it has to work for everyone. You cannot design a park for an ideal user. You have to design for the elderly man who comes every morning, the children who will use it after school, the vendor who needs a spot, the couple who wants a quiet bench, the teenager who needs somewhere to exist that is not home and not school. Every decision is a negotiation between competing needs, and every solution is a compromise that either works or doesn't based on whether you did the thinking properly. I did the thinking properly. I spent 7 years doing nothing but. In my 3rd year, I won a national design competition for a transit plaza in Hyderabad. In my 4th year, that project was completed and featured in 3 publications. In my 5th year, I was invited to join an international working group on inclusive public space design. In my 6th year, I published a paper that got more attention than I had expected, about the relationship between pedestrian-scale design and community health outcomes. That led to speaking invitations and consultancy requests, and a general, gradual, accumulating visibility in the field. In my 7th year, the National Urban Design Institute, the institution where I had been invisible, invited me back. Not as a student, not as a junior anything. As the new senior director of the Urban Projects Division. I accepted without hesitation. Not because of Karen. I want to be clear about that, because the story is going to go a specific direction, and I do not want you to think the job was about him. The job was about the work. The Institute was launching a new division focused on public interest design projects, the kind of work I had been doing in Delhi, and they had come to me because of the track record, because of the paper, because of 7 years of unglamorous and completely serious work in a field that needed it. I accepted because it was the right move at the right time. The fact that Karen Malhotra had, 4 months earlier, been appointed to a senior fellowship position at the same institute, that was information I had, but it was not the reason. I told myself this every day for the 3 weeks between accepting the offer and walking through that door. I was mostly honest. Part 3, the badge. The morning I arrived, I wore a plain shirt and my good jacket, and I carried my bag, and I had the badge, which had been mailed to me the week before in my breast pocket where it belonged. The institute had changed and had not changed. The building was the same, the studios with their particular smell of paper and model glue and stale coffee, the light in the central atrium that I had always loved, the notice board still slightly too full of overlapping information. I had a guide, a young administrator named Priya who was brisk and efficient, and showed me to my office on the 3rd floor with the manner of someone who had done this onboarding many times and had a system. The office was good, window facing west, which I noted with professional approval. A drafting table along one wall, a proper desk, shelves that were empty and waiting. I set down my bag. I looked out the window at the view, which included a stretch of the city that I had once drawn obsessively in sketchbooks as a student, trying to understand why it worked the way it worked. Then Priya had shown me the team. The Urban Projects Division was new, which meant the staff were drawn from existing institute departments, seconded, some of them, others newly hired. 8 people in total. Good people, from what I could see in those first minutes, focused, a little uncertain about the new leadership, watching me with the careful attention of people who were deciding what to make of me. And at the back of the room, standing at a drafting table, not looking up, was Karen Malhotra. He looked up when Priya said the names. And Karen Malhotra, senior fellow, who'll be leading the structural integration work on the division's first project. Karen looked up. Our eyes met. I watched the sequence of his recognition, the initial blank of a stranger's face, then the adjustment, then the reaching back, 7 years, a junior student, background noise, and then the moment the badge registered. Senior Director, Rohan Verma. I watched him understand. I did not smile. I did not do anything except meet his eyes with the same steadiness that 7 years of difficult, real, consequential work had given me. And I said to the room, to all of them, "Good morning. I'm looking forward to working with all of you. Let's begin." Karen looked at me for 1 more second. Then he looked back at his drafting table. Part 4, the first week. I want to be honest about the first week because it was not triumphant. It was professional and focused, and there were moments of genuine difficulty that had nothing to do with Karen and everything to do with the complexity of actually setting up a new division from scratch. The project was significant, a public waterfront redevelopment in a mid-sized coastal city in Maharashtra, the kind of project that required coordination across urban design, community engagement, environmental assessment, structural engineering, and municipal government. My job was to hold all of those threads and make something coherent emerge. This was the work I had been trained for, and the work I was good at, and it absorbed me almost immediately and completely in the way good work does. Karen's role was structural integration, making sure the design proposals were buildable, financially realistic, structurally sound. It was the right role for him. He was extraordinarily good at understanding the relationship between a design idea and its material reality. This meant we had to work together. Not constantly, not immediately, but inevitably. The first real working interaction came on Wednesday of the first week, in a team review session. I had been running through the project brief, laying out the framework for how we would approach Phase 1, and I had gotten to the point about the main promenade structure, the spine of the waterfront design, when I had paused and asked the room if anyone had questions or initial thoughts. Karen had looked up from his notes. "The gradient on the promenade," he said. His voice was exactly as I remembered it, confident, precise, the voice of someone who expected to be heard. "The brief specifies a continuous accessible grade, but the site survey shows a natural elevation change of almost 4 meters across the promenade length. That's going to affect the structural approach significantly." He was right. It was the most important technical complication in the brief, and he had found it in less than a week. "Correct," I said. "I've flagged it as the first priority structural question. I'd like a preliminary analysis on proposed solutions by end of next week. Can you lead that?" A pause, brief. "Yes," he said. "Thank you," I said. I moved on. I did not let myself think about the fact that this was the first real conversation we had ever had. I had a division to build. The preliminary analysis came in on Friday, 2 days early. It was, and I want to be professionally accurate here, excellent. Not just competent, not just adequate. He had looked at the gradient problem from 3 different structural approaches, modeled the cost implications of each, assessed which was most compatible with the design intent of the brief, and written it up with the particular clarity of someone who understood that a structural document also needed to communicate to designers, and not just engineers. I read it twice. Then I wrote back, "This is strong work. The second option is the direction we should go. Let's discuss Monday." He replied, "Agreed, Monday." 3 words, but they were 3 words where before there had been nothing. I filed this, the way I always filed things, and went home. Part 5, the pattern shifts. Working with someone changes things. This is the fundamental fact about proximity. It dissolves the simplified image you carry of a person and replaces it with the complicated actual one. Over the following weeks, I learned things about Karen Malhotra that I had not known from years of watching him across studios. I learned that he arrived earlier than anyone else on the team, and usually had already done 2 hours of work before the formal day started. I learned that he kept his desk in a state that appeared chaotic, but had its own internal logic, and that he could find any document in it in approximately 15 seconds. I learned that he was unexpectedly patient with the younger team members, not warm exactly, not the kind of patient that involves hand-holding, but the kind that waits for someone to finish a thought rather than finishing it for them. I learned that he was funny, in a very dry way, and that most people on the team had not noticed this because the humor was quiet and well-timed, and often appeared in the space between sentences rather than being announced. I learned that he had strong opinions about tea, the correct steeping time, the ratio, and that the office kitchen's electric kettle was a source of ongoing, largely internal suffering for him. I learned these things the way you learn things when you are working alongside someone every day, close enough to see detail. I observed them with the precision I applied to everything, and I filed them, and I continued to be the senior director, and I continued to work. I did not let myself think about what I was feeling. That door had been locked for 7 years. I was very good at keeping it locked. The moment things shifted was a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks in. The team had been working late on a community consultation presentation. We had a meeting with the Coastal Cities Municipal Committee the following week, and the presentation needed to be clear and compelling without oversimplifying the technical reality of the project. Most of the team had gone home by 8. I was still at my desk when I heard someone in the studio. I came out. Karen was at the large plotting table, pinning up a series of hand-drawn section drawings, cross-sections through the promenade at different points, each one beautifully drafted, showing the relationship between the structural solution and the public space above it in a way that no digital drawing had quite managed to capture. I stopped in the doorway. He didn't hear me immediately. He was focused on the drawings, adjusting the position of one, stepping back to look at the full sequence. And I stood there watching him work, the same way I had watched him work across studios for 3 years, except that now I was 4 meters away and could see the drawings clearly, and the drawings were extraordinary. He turned, saw me, and did not startle exactly, just adjusted. "Rohan," he said. It was the first time he had used my name. "Those drawings," I said. I crossed to the table and looked at them properly. Up close they were even better, the line weight, the notations, the way the human figures he had drawn into the sections were not generic stick figures, but actual people with specific postures and gaits, which made the scale legible and the space feel inhabited and real. "For the presentation," I asked. "I thought they might be clearer than the digital versions," he said. He was watching me look at the drawings with an expression I couldn't quite read. "For the committee." "They're better," I said. "Much better." I looked at the full sequence. "This is exactly what we needed." Silence for a moment. "Thank you," he said. I looked up at him then. He was close, closer than I had registered, both of us leaning toward the drawing table, and the evening light from the single lamp on the table between us, and his face was serious and open in a way it wasn't usually. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes," I said. "Did you, when you were a student here?" He stopped, something careful happening in his expression. "I don't remember you the way I should." The statement landed quietly in the empty studio. I looked at him for a moment. "No," I said, "you don't." He absorbed this. "I'm sorry," he said. And he said it simply, without performance, without excessive self-flagellation, in the way of someone who has thought about something and arrived at a genuine conclusion. I looked at the drawings again. "These are excellent work," I said. "Let's make sure they're the centerpiece of Thursday's presentation." He was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said. I went back to my office. I sat at my desk. I looked at the city through the west window. I was not going to let 7 years of careful distance dissolve in one evening, in an empty studio. But something had moved, something small and significant and impossible to entirely ignore. Part 6, Close Range. The municipal committee presentation went well. Better than well, the hand-drawn sections were, as I had predicted, exactly the right choice for a room full of non-designers who needed to understand a complex spatial proposition without being alienated by technical rendering. The committee asked good questions. The project advanced to Phase 2. On the way back from the coastal city, a 4-hour drive in a shared vehicle, Karen and I ended up in the back seat together, the other team members in the front and the second vehicle. The drive back was at night. The highway was dark and the city was still far away, and the team was quieter than the drive down, the post-presentation energy subsiding. Karen had fallen asleep within an hour. Or mostly asleep, the specific half-sleep of someone in a moving vehicle, head against the window, not entirely unconscious. I had my notebook open and was writing up observations from the meeting, which was what I always did after significant meetings while the details were fresh. At some point, I became aware that he had shifted, turned slightly from the window. his head at an angle that was not quite comfortable, the kind of angle that produces neck pain in the morning. I looked at him in the dark of the car. 7 years of carrying something I had never examined too directly. 7 years of building something real and solid and mine. And here was this person, asleep in a car, looking exactly like what he was, a complicated, brilliant, real human being who had not seen me once and was now, with the specific vertigo of proximity, becoming someone I was seeing more clearly than was entirely safe. I looked back at my notebook. I kept writing. He was awake by the time we reached Mumbai, the city announcing itself in the way it does, the lights, the density, the particular atmospheric pressure of 10 million people. The vehicle had quieted to something companionable and tired. "The committee chair," he said, out of a silence. "The one who asked about the gradient drainage." "Yes," I said. "She knew exactly what she was asking about," he said. "She was testing whether we'd done the full environmental assessment or were winging it." "I know," I said. "That's why I gave her the full answer and not the shortened one." He turned to look at me in the dark. "How did you know she'd respond better to the full answer?" "She had a folder in front of her with the environmental impact pre-assessment from the 2019 proposal," I said. "The one that failed because the assessment was inadequate. She knew the subject. She needed to see that we did too." A pause. "I didn't notice the folder," he said. "You were looking at the wrong side of the table," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "You notice everything," he said. It was not quite a question. "It's useful," I said. "Yes," he said, and then after a moment, "I imagine it has been." The way he said it was careful, like there was more in it than the words carried, like he was acknowledging something without nomming it directly. I looked out the window at the city coming up around us. "Get some sleep when you're home," I said. "The Phase 2 kickoff is Thursday." "I know," he said. We didn't speak again until we reached the institute and said goodnight in the parking lot, and I drove home and sat in my apartment for a while doing nothing, which was not something I often did. Part 7, the complication. Here is where I need to tell you about Vikram. Vikram Sood was a colleague from my Delhi years, senior to me then, now running his own practice in Mumbai, someone I had stayed in contact with because he was genuinely good and good company. He had texted me the week I arrived back in Mumbai asking to meet up, and we had, and it had been easy and warm in the way of reconnecting with someone you actually like. Vikram was also, I should tell you, someone who had made clear over the years that his interest in me was not purely collegial. Not pushed, not uncomfortable, he was too thoughtful for that, but clear. Occasional and clear. I had not, in Delhi, been ready for anything. All of my capacity had been in the work, and there had been the door I kept locked. And Vikram, who deserved someone who was fully present, had waited in the easy, undemanding way of someone who is genuinely fine with waiting and also genuinely fine if the waiting produces nothing. He texted me in the 3rd week I was back. Dinner, Friday, he knew a good place in Colaba. I said yes. Dinner with Vikram was good. It was easy in the way that things are easy when there is no performance involved, when you can talk about work and the city and the 8 years since we had been in the same city without managing anything. He had a new project he was excited about, a community library in the eastern suburbs that had run into political complications he was navigating. I told him about the waterfront project. We talked for 3 hours, and the food was excellent, and I walked out feeling, for the first time since arriving in Mumbai, genuinely relaxed. He walked me to where I'd parked and said, in his quiet way, "It's good to have you here, Rohan." "It's good to be here," I said. A pause. He looked at me with the specific expression of someone who is deciding whether to push something. "Dinner again sometime," he said. "Yes," I said, and meant it. He smiled. We said goodnight. I drove home. I did not, I told myself, think about whether there was anything in Vikram's expression that I was comparing to Karen's expression in the dark of a car. I did not think about whether the ease I felt with Vikram was a different kind of ease from the charged, complicated attention I brought to every room Karen was in. I was very practiced at not thinking about certain things. It was becoming less effective. Part 8. What Karen saw. I found out, 2 weeks later, that Karen had seen me leave dinner with Vikram. Not directly, he had not said anything to me. I found out because Priya, the administrator, mentioned in passing that she had run into Karen at a restaurant in Kalaba on a Friday, and he had been distracted in a way that was unusual for him. I filed this, I said nothing, but I filed it. And I started noticing things. The specific way Karen looked when Vikram's name came up in conversation. Once, because Vikram's firm was known in the field, and I had mentioned he was an old colleague. A slight tightening. A neutrality that was performed rather than natural. The way Karen had begun, very gradually, to be in places I was. Not following, he was not that kind of person and the spaces were shared workspaces. But present. In the studio when I worked late. At the coffee point when I came in early. At the window I had claimed as a thinking spot, standing with his own tea, looking at the city, the first time I had ever seen him there. I observed all of this with precision, and I made a decision. I was going to let it be whatever it was going to be. I was not going to push, not going to signal, not going to open the door I had kept locked for 7 years based on a tightening expression and someone standing at a window. I had spent 7 years building something real and solid, and I was not going to compromise it on the basis of what might be nothing more than professional discomfort from a man who was not used to being under someone else's direction. The work remained. The work was always there. I focused on the work. Part 9. The night of the models. The physical model of Phase 1 was due to the full Institute board at the end of the month. This was a significant moment. The board's approval of Phase 1 would unlock the full project funding, and the model needed to be both technically accurate and spatially legible to people who were not designers. We had been building it in sections over 3 weeks, and the night before the presentation we needed to assemble the full thing and make sure it worked as a whole. This was the kind of work that required everyone, and we had booked the studio until midnight. Most of the team left by 10. The final assembly, the most finicky part, the part that required the fewest hands and the most precision, was left to me and Karen, because those were the hands that knew the model best. We worked in the quiet studio for 2 hours, the model growing under our hands, neither of us talking much because the work required concentration. The waterfront emerged in miniature, the promenade with its gradient solution, the public plazas at 3 points along the water, the structures Karen had designed rendered in balsa and acrylic, and the particular textured paper we had used for the water surface. At some point, the nature of the work required us to be on the same side of the table, both leaning over the same section, and I was aware, with the precision I brought to everything, of exactly how close we were. His hands were steady and exact, placing a small structure into its position with the care of someone who knew how much it mattered. My hands were beside his, holding the adjacent section in alignment. "Hold," he said. I held. He made a small adjustment, checked the alignment, nodded. "Good," he said. We both straightened. And he turned to look at me, and I was still looking at the model, and when I turned my head we were closer than I had registered, the space between us the length of a held breath, his face serious and focused, and for the first time I could remember, uncertain. "Rohan," he said. "We should check the north section alignment," I said. A pause. "Rohan," he said it differently this time, not as a way to begin a sentence, as the sentence itself. I looked at him. The studio was quiet. The model sat between us, perfect and complete, the tiny city we had built together over 3 weeks. The lamp above the table made everything gold. "I need to say something," he said. "And I need to say it badly and probably incorrectly the first time, and I'm asking you to be patient with me." I waited. "I spent 3 years not seeing you," he said. "I have been trying for 6 weeks to understand how I did that. And I can't fully explain it except that I was someone who moved through rooms looking at what confirmed what I already thought, and you didn't fit any category I had, and so I filed you as nothing, and that is," he stopped. "That is the thing I am most ashamed of professionally, and it should stop there, and for a while I thought it would. And then I started working with you." He was looking at me with an openness that was, I suspected, very difficult for him. This was not a man who offered uncertainty easily. "I've been watching you work for 6 weeks," he said. "And I've been watching the way you think and the way you move through a room and the way you notice the folder on the committee chair's side of the table. And I've been trying to tell myself that what I'm feeling is professional respect, and I think it is that. But it is also something else, and I think you know what I'm talking about." I looked at the model. 6 weeks, I said, against 7 years. "I know," he said quietly, no defense. "You didn't see me," I said. "You looked through me for 3 years. You reached across my work to get things you needed without saying a word. At a critique where the faculty called my analysis particularly insightful, you nodded at him, not at me." He received each of these without flinching. "Yes," he said. "I am your senior director," I said. "I am the reason this project is moving. I built this position in 7 years of work in a field that doesn't reward you unless you do the actual work, and I built it while being invisible to people like you." "I know that," he said. "So what are you asking me?" I said. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not asking you anything," he said. "I don't have the right to ask you anything. I'm telling you something true and letting you do with it what you want. That's all." The studio hummed. The model sat between us. I looked at him for a long time. At this complicated, real, imperfect person who had been brilliant and blind in equal measure, who was standing in front of me in an empty studio at midnight with his uncertainty showing. "The board presentation is at 9, I said. "We should both get some sleep." He nodded, once. "Rohan." "Good night, Karen," I said. I picked up my jacket and my bag. I walked to the door. At the door I stopped, and I did not turn around. "I'll see you at 8:30, I said. "We should do a final check before the board arrives." 8:30, he said. I left. Part 10, the morning. I did not sleep particularly well. This is not a surprise. I lay in my apartment looking at the ceiling, and I let myself, for the first time in 7 years, actually examine the thing I had kept locked in a drawer and never looked at directly. I took it out. I looked at it in the dark. What I found was not what I expected. I had expected to find the old thing, the quiet longing of a student for someone who didn't know he existed, romanticized by distance, sustained by imagination. The kind of feeling that dissolves when the real person becomes close enough to see clearly. What I found instead was something that had been added to. Something that the last 6 weeks had contributed to, not replacing the old feeling but building on it, incorporating new information. The drawings on the table at 8 in the evening. The structural analysis 2 days early. The hand-drawn sections that understood what the room needed. The patience with the younger team members. The way he held a pencil when he was thinking. The folder he hadn't noticed because he was looking at the wrong side of the table. The openness in an empty studio at midnight. I sat with this for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called Vikram. Vikram answered on the 3rd ring, which meant he was awake, which was very Vikram at this hour. "Rohan," he said, "it's 1 in the morning." "I know," I said. "I need to tell you something." "Okay," he said, calm, ready. "I don't think dinner is what it might become," I said. "I think there's something else, and I think you've probably already seen it." A pause. "Yes," he said, "since about 3 weeks ago." "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't be," he said, and he meant it. I could hear it. "Is it Karen Malhotra?" I was quiet for a moment. "How did you know?" "You mentioned him twice in a single dinner without noticing," he said. "That's not how you talk about colleagues." I closed my eyes. "He was the person who," I started. "I know," Vikram said. "You told me about him once. Years ago, you probably don't remember." "What did I say?" "You said there was someone at the Institute who had the best spatial instinct you'd ever seen and who didn't know you existed," he said. "You said it very carefully and then changed the subject immediately." I was quiet. "Go to sleep, Rohan," he said. You have a board presentation in the morning. Figure the rest out after. You're a good person, I said. I know, he said. Good night. Part 11, THE board and after. The board presentation was everything it needed to be. The model was exactly right. The drawings, Karen's hand-drawn sections, did what I had known they would do, making the space real and legible for people who needed to feel it rather than read it. The gradient solution, which Karen had developed, was presented with the kind of clear confidence that comes from actually understanding what you've built. The board asked hard questions, and we answered them well, because we had done the work. Approval for Phase 2 was unanimous. Afterward, in the corridor outside the boardroom, the team was doing the quiet, professional version of celebration: handshakes, real smiles, the specific relief of a significant milestone made. Karen was across the corridor, speaking with 2 board members who had questions about structural timelines. I watched him answer with his usual precise confidence and thought, that is someone who is very good at this, and I am very glad he is on this team, and those 2 facts are not the end of the sentence. He finished with the board members. They moved on. He turned and found me watching. We stood across the corridor from each other. Good work, I said. You too, he said. Around us the team dispersed. The corridor quieted. There's a review of Phase 2 scope this afternoon, I said. 3 o'clock, he said. Yes, I said. And then, because I had made a decision somewhere between 1 in the morning and 8:30. And after the review, if you want to talk. He looked at me for a moment. His expression did something careful and then stopped being careful. After the review, he said. Part 12, after the review. We walked to the terrace. The Institute had a terrace, a working terrace, actually, with sections of model making and a long parapet table that was often used for outdoor critiques in good weather. Today it was empty, the late afternoon light coming in at a low angle, the city spread below. We stood at the parapet and looked at the city, and neither of us spoke for a moment. 7 years, I said finally. I need you to understand what that means, not to punish you, but because if this is going somewhere, it has to go somewhere real, and real requires honesty. Tell me, he said. So I told him. I told him about the 3 years at the Institute, about looking up from my work and watching someone brilliant exist in the same space without knowing I was there, about the critique where the faculty had called my analysis particularly insightful, and he had looked at the faculty member, about the years of industry events where he had spoken past me and through me and around me. I told him about Delhi, about 7 years of work that had been, in part, powered by the specific energy of needing to build something irrefutable, about the paper and the competitions and the slow, deliberate accumulation of a reputation that nobody had handed me. And then I told him the thing I had never told anyone. I was in love with you, I said, or something that lived in the neighborhood of love for most of those 3 years, while you didn't know I existed. And I want you to understand that I am not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because you asked for honesty, and this is what honesty looks like. He was very still beside me. I don't know, I continued, what I feel now. I know it's more complicated than what I felt then because now you are an actual person and not an idea. I know that the last 6 weeks have added things I didn't have before. I know that I said good night to you in an empty studio at midnight and drove home and called Vikram, who is a good man who deserved better from me, and lay awake looking at the ceiling. The city moved below us. What I don't know, I said, is whether you understand what you're asking for, whether this is something that comes from genuinely seeing me after years of not, or something else. And I need you to know that I am not afraid either way. I have the badge, I have the work, I have the life I built. Whatever you say does not change those things. He turned to look at me. Can I tell you something? He said. Yes, I said. I have spent 6 weeks trying to figure out how to be in a room with you without every part of my attention going to you, he said. I have been unable to do it. I notice where you are in a room before I have consciously looked. When you're not in the studio, I am aware of the specific quality of your absence. I saw you leave dinner in Kalaba, and I went home and sat in my apartment, and understood for the first time in my life that I had been looking at the wrong things for a very long time. He paused. "I don't know how to make 7 years right," he said. "I don't think there is a way. I think there is only being here now, seeing you now, and asking very honestly if that is something." The terrace was quiet. The city was going gold below. I looked at him, this complicated, brilliant, imperfect person. This man who had been a blind spot and a locked door and a reason to build something real. This person who was, right now, more openly uncertain than I had ever seen him, offering something true. I looked at the city. I had the badge, I had the work, I had the life I built. And I realized, no longer interested in keeping the door locked. "One condition," I said. "Tell me," he said. "We do this honestly," I said. "No managing, no careful distance, no looking at the wrong side of the table. If something is difficult, we say it's difficult. If something is wrong, we say what's wrong." "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "And you don't get to be the person who reached across my work to get things he needed," I said. "That person doesn't exist anymore. This is someone different." "I know," he said. "I'm trying to be someone different." I nodded once. Below us, the city was doing its evening thing, all that light, all that accumulated life. The project files were on my desk. The Phase 2 kickoff was next week. The work was there, reliable and real and ongoing. "Come on," I said. "We should get back." I turned and walked toward the terrace door. He fell into step beside me. Our arms were close, not quite touching. At the door, I stopped, and he stopped beside me, and I turned my head and looked at him one more time. This complicated beginning of something I hadn't planned and couldn't entirely name. 8:30 tomorrow, I said. 8:30, he said. And something in his face, for the first time since I had walked through that door with the badge on my chest, was not careful at all. Part 13, what the badge meant. 6 months later. The waterfront project is in Phase 3. The model that we assembled at midnight in the studio is now displayed in the Institute's main atrium. The hand-drawn sections are framed on the wall of the project room, which I put there because they are excellent and because the younger team members should see what excellent actually looks like. Vikram came to the Phase 2 completion event and brought his partner, a landscape architect from Bangalore named Dev, who is exactly right for him, easy and warm and uncomplicated in the specific way that Vikram needed. They look like people who have found their correct shape together. I am happy for him in a way that is entirely genuine. My parents visited in November. I showed my father the project plans. He looked at them for a long time with the thoroughness of someone who is assessing something and approving it and said, "Good bones," which is, from my father, the highest available praise. Karen moved into a new apartment in February. It was his decision. His lease was up, and he had been thinking about the move for months. The new place is in Bandra, closer to the Institute, with better natural light and a view of a stretch of the city we have discussed many times in the context of what good urban design does and doesn't do to a neighborhood. I helped him move. This is not as significant a statement as it might seem. It was a practical thing, a vehicle and a few hours on a Saturday. But I will tell you that we spent an hour after the boxes were in, standing at the window of the new place looking at that stretch of city, talking about what we saw. Really talking, the conversation I had wanted to have for 10 years, the conversation between equals who see the same things and have different and compatible ways of seeing them. It was, I realized, the best conversation I had ever had. The badge is on my desk now, not my chest. It's just an object, a piece of plastic with a name and a title. The name and the title are real, earned, solid mine, but they are not the point. The point is what I know now that I did not know 7 years ago. I know that invisibility, when it is imposed by someone else's limited vision, says nothing true about you. I know that the work you do when nobody is looking is the realest work. I know that a life built deliberately and patiently, and for its own sake, is the only kind of foundation worth having. I know that people can change. Not completely, not without cost, not without the work of actually deciding to see what they have been looking past. But they can. I know that the locked door I kept for 7 years was mine to open when I chose, not when someone else chose. Mine. And I know, standing at a window in Bandra with a person who is finally, after all this time, looking at what is actually in front of him, that what is built slowly and honestly is the thing that lasts. Clapperboard final hook. He ignored me for 7 years. He reached across my work without a word. He looked through me at critiques. He spoke past me at every industry event. He filed me as nothing because I didn't fit a category he recognized. And then I walked through the door with a badge that had my name on it, and I sat at the head of the room, and I looked at him with the steadiness of someone who had spent 7 years building something irrefutable. The badge was not the revenge. The badge was just the proof. The revenge was every year of work in Delhi when nobody was watching, every project that mattered, every decision to stay in the difficult, unglamorous, real part of the field when I could have left for something easier. The revenge was building something so solid that, when I finally walked back into the room, there was nothing to argue with. And the story, the part I haven't told you yet, is what happened after. If this story found something in you, if you have ever built something in the quiet, while someone looked past you, while you kept going anyway, like this, share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe. Drop a comment. What is the thing you built when nobody was watching? And one last question. There's a moment 3 months after the terrace, after the honesty, after the decision, where something almost breaks, where a misunderstanding that had its roots in those 7 years of silence surfaced in a way that neither of us was ready for. Should I tell you what almost undid everything? Part 2 is coming. Eyes. Subscribe. You will not want to miss it. The Revenge Chronicles.